Well, that's not only a landmark song in the career of the Beach Boys, but also one of the most famous and beloved songs ever made. California Girls from the Beach Boys' 1965 album Summer Days and Summer Nights. Endless Summer Quarterly's editor David Beard joins us again as part of our continuing series of Beach Boys album reviews. David, how are you?
I'm terrific. I hope you are.
I am, thank you. And we've got quite the classic album to review and discuss today. I mean, this is a fascinating record on many levels and a very enjoyable one for me. But, you know, its reputation seems to have suffered over the years because one could always chart the Beach Boys' progress from their very first album, Surfin' Safari, right up to the album that preceded Summer Days, the Beach Boys' Today album, which, if anyone remembers our discussion about that record, that album saw Brian grouping a bunch of up-tempo pop songs on side one and then reserving side two for a collection of lush, introspective ballads that sound as if he's making a dry run for the Pet Sounds album. Now, for a lot of fans, this album, Summer Days and Summer Nights, seems like a step back. I'm not convinced of that. What are your thoughts, David?
You know, it's an interesting group of albums and how they kind of got there. And as you know, because you're someone who is very familiar with all their music, beginning in '64, they went from Shut Down Volume 2
right
to All Summer Long. So that's a studio album of Beach Boys, expected Beach Boys material. Then they did concert, then they did the Christmas album. So the last true, for lack of a better term, regular Beach Boys album before the Today album in '65 was All Summer Long.
Right.
And I gleaned this comment kind of from Bruce Johnston, who shared this with me. It's his perception, and I don't disagree with it. All Summer Long was really the album that segued to Summer Days and Summer Nights. If you listen to the two of them, they both represent the Beach Boys to the genre and the idiom of who they were and how the public knew them, whereas Today does not do that as a whole album. So I like Summer Days just for what it is, not in comparison to Today, and not necessarily even in comparison to what was to follow on Pet Sounds, and not even in comparison to All Summer Long. I think it's a nice summer album, and by nice, does that make it weak? I think if you listen to California Girls, You're So Good to Me, Then I Kissed Her,
yeah,
Amusement Parks USA, the girl from New York City, in some sense, just looking at the titles right now, this isn't a full artistic set. California Girls certainly has an artistic element to it with its orchestral prelude, but for the most part, this record, this long player, is just kind of Brian Wilson's last nod to being a part of a summer group.
Right, but I also think there's a misconception out there among music fans that upbeat pop songs are somehow less profound than soul-bearing sad songs. Personally, I can find a lot of profundity in fun music. I mean, the word fun is in the word profundity. So I think there's a lot going on in this record, especially when it comes to the tracks Brian created in the studio.
Well, no question.
Yeah.
If we were exposed to all the tracks on the Summer Days album, like we were exposed to the tracks on the Pet Sounds with the Pet Sounds Sessions box set,
right,
people would quickly realize there is a lot going on. But that was one of Brian's many gifts as a composer and arranger, to work really hard at getting the song to the point where it needed lyrics. And that's where Cousin Mike came in.
Right.
Pretty much. I mean, this is widely a Mike Love, Brian Wilson collaborative effort.
Yeah, well, let's start going through the album here. Side one opens with The Girl from New York City. This is kind of an answer song to the ad-libs The Boy from New York City. I think it's a great album opener. It's a really energetic cut, and you can hear their R&B influences on this recording.
Yeah, the Beach Boys were very influenced by doo-wop and R&B all their lives, still are today. Mike Love just said that it was a copycat thing. Brian and he just thought they would do a song about a girl who comes from New York City as opposed to a boy.
Right.
So I don't think there was ever any initial deep thought behind this. This is one of those what can we do to fill out an album songs. And it is really done well, and it's executed excellently. And you can see where Brian gets his not just R&B influence, but you can hear, and we'll talk about it in a minute on Then I Kissed Her, but you can hear the Phil Spector influence.
We're talking with David Beard of Endless Summer Quarterly magazine about the Beach Boys' 1965 album, Summer Days and Summer Nights. We just heard the opening cut, The Girl from New York City, on to track 2, Amusement Parks USA. Would it be fair to call this a semi-sequel to County Fair off the first album?
I don't know. I never even thought of it that way. I've always found it oddly inviting.
Yeah.
It's certainly full of youth. And silliness. The Beach Boys had recorded silly skits on the Today album, Bull Session with Big Daddy and whatnot, where they would just goof around the microphone, just kind of as an album filler. And this kind of, to my ear, sounds like, okay, let's be silly, but let's actually do a song and be silly. Very purposely, with Hal Blaine's Barker routine, which he actually used to, I don't know who knows this, but Hal told me back in '96 that he used to work for Barnum and Bailey's. So he had experience as the Barker. And so that's how he ended up, Brian said, hey, Hal, why don't you do the Step Right Up to the Boys Circus,
I do like the fact that Mike, in the lyrics, references all the amusement parks that either the band played or that they were aware of, sort of name-checking locations like he did on Surfin' USA.
Well, yeah, I think they just kind of figured out that was a recipe, like baking a cake. Once they did it with Surfin' USA and they realized, okay, this is a listing thing, Mike did the same thing with California Girls. He listed girls from around different locations. And I think this is kind of the same thing. Yeah,
and that'll take us to track 3 on the album. Once again, we're not going to play every single song off the album, just certain ones. But track 3 is Then I Kissed Her, a well-known song by the Crystals, produced by Phil Spector. But here, the Beach Boys really make this their own.
They really do. And the thing that I made it a point to talk to the guys about was, to me, when I listened to this song, and I liked, certainly, the things that Phil Spector did in the music community back at the same time. Mm-hmm. Really good stuff. There's very few people who were kind of Spector's equal, but certainly at that time, Brian was his equal, whether Spector would admit that or not. Right. And I think when you listen to this, I kind of point blank asked Mike, I said, do you think that Brian, was caliber of Phil Spector? And Mike, I'm going to read you the quote here. Mm-hmm. Brian became obsessed with Phil Spector and was very influenced by Spector with some of his recordings and productions. He became obsessed with Be My Baby. In Brian's mind, the production to Be My Baby was an almost unachievable goal to do something with that incredibly powerfully produced. Admittedly, it's a fantastic production, great song. The Ronettes were great. But then when I asked, okay, would you agree that Brian's music left a more impactful imprint on music than Spector's? Mike says, absolutely. Brian was profoundly impressed and affected by Spector, but he didn't stop there. Brian was much more diverse and talented in his chord progressions and harmonies than Spector could ever hope to be. Brian wasn't limited by his love for Be My Baby. He was inspired by it. When he said that to me, that really... Yeah, there's a difference of being influenced by something,
right,
and then inspired by is different. That's kind of the influence plus motivation. I don't think even I'll just include myself in this statement only, and that is I don't think I truly to this day, as much as I've listened to this group and listened to session after session after session, right. I still don't think I'm fully gotten to the point where I fully understand the man's genius.
Oh, I'm the same way, and both of us have this huge Beach Boys back catalog at our disposal, but there's always something new to discover. There's always something surprising. Case in point, the next cut on the album, Salt Lake City, this is a song that I dismissed for years. I never paid that much attention to it until I heard the sessions for this song on the Hawthorne, California compilation. And that's when it dawned on me just how complex and unique this song was in terms of the composition, the arrangement, the production, everything.
Yeah, Mike, contributing the words, and this is not a slight towards anybody, But that track, it can be about anything.
Yeah.
The lyrics could be about love. It could be about Salt Lake City. It could be about surfing again. It really wouldn't matter. And the neat thing is, at some point in the process, they decided this was a tribute to Salt Lake City and those fans, and it's just really cool they did. When you think about it, how many times have the Beach Boys done this in their career? You know, how many times have they written something personal to a fan base somewhere?
That's Salt Lake City from the Beach Boys' Summer Days and Summer Nights album, which David Beard and I are discussing on today's program. Track 5 on the record is Girl Don't Tell Me, which is a very Beatlesque recording. And there are all sorts of rumors that this was either inspired by Ticket to Ride, which certainly sounds that way, or this was Brian's attempt at writing a song for the Beatles, which I'm not really sure makes any sense because obviously the Beatles wrote their own songs and didn't need help. But what are your thoughts on Girl Don't Tell Me?
Yeah, Mike compared Girl Don't Tell Me to Don't Hurt My Little Sister. Now, Bruce did specifically mention the Beatlesque sound Brian created, and Carl being a little timid about singing it in the studio. Bruce remembered standing out in the hallway listening to Carl sing. It was kind of, he said, it was kind of like listening to Carl sing with a pillow over his mouth because the walls were so thick. But, you know, the song has a strong John Lennon influence.
Yeah.
More so than a McCartney influence. And shows Brian had listened to and really kind of taken in and was inspired by the Beatles' chord patterns and vocal inflections. When Carl sings, "Ride,"
yeah,
that's like a ticket to ride.
Yep.
Same thing right there.
David, let's wrap up our discussion on side 1 of the Beach Boys' Summer Days and Summer Nights album. The last song on side 1 was a song that also appeared on the Beach Boys' Today album, Help Me Rhonda. On the album before this, Rhonda was spelt without the H. Brian evidently wasn't happy with that recording and decided that the song had a lot of potential, recut the song. It becomes a #1 single, and here it is yet again on their follow-up album, Summer Days and Summer Nights.
He listened to Help Me Rhonda on the Today album. It's like it's literally recorded while Brian was still monkeying around with it. But it still ended up on the album and it went out. And he went back to it. I do know that because it had been on the Today album, and then it was a single after the Today album, that Brian was not even thinking about it for the Summer Days album. So Bruce told me that they were looking for one more song, and Bruce said to him, "Brian, this is the #1 single. Why wouldn't you put it on the album?" So isn't that weird that it wasn't kind of a lock that would be one of the first ones you'd think would be included?
We're back on the Vintage Rock and Pop Shop talking with Endless Summer Quarterly editor David Beard about the Beach Boys' Summer Days and Summer Nights album, released on July 5th, 1965. The album reached #2 on the Billboard charts, #4 in the UK. Help Me Rhonda was a #1 single, and the song that starts off side 2, and the song that we played at the beginning of this conversation, is California Girls, which only reached #3, which people might find a little surprising because it's basically the Beach Boys' anthem. It's definitely one of their most famous and recognizable songs.
I think at this point in 1965, before we get to Pet Sounds, before we get to Good Vibrations, which is October 66, California Girls is easily far and away a pop masterpiece.
Yeah.
Regardless of where you live, it's kind of it's a theme song for girls everywhere, with an homage to the girls from the boys' own home state. But I think this song turned out so brilliantly because Brian had earned the trust of the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah.
He was consistent in the studio with them. They just said, you know what, this kid's onto something. All we need to do is just listen to his ideas, and we're professional enough that we're going to execute him. And the thing that, to Brian's credit, he listened to their ideas. If they had an idea or a thought during the sessions, they'd say, "Hey, Brian, what do you think about if I do this?" And he'd go, "Play it real quick."
Right.
And they'd play it. And if he liked it, he'd say, "Yeah, okay, do that." Brian inherently knew when to listen
And before we move on, we should mention that for Dennis Wilson, that song was probably autobiographical. Okay. Moving on.
All the Wrecking Crew, we did talk about them, but Carl Wilson does play the 12-string guitar on that. It's really interesting when you hear the guys themselves talk about it, how the guys come back from the road, they go into Western Studio 3, and Brian plays this track for them, and at that point, Brian had the line, "Yeah, I dig the girls," which ended up being a part of the chorus. So that's what Brian had. So Mike says, "All right, well, play the track. I'll be right back. I need to hear the track a few more times."
Right.
They listen to the track. Mike grabs a legal pad or whatever, goes out into this little hallway, and boom, 30 minutes later, they're in the studio around a microphone, putting down vocals, and then we have this incredible song that has just stood like like when I say pop masterpiece, I mean it's like a statue. It's like it's as big as Rocky. You know what I mean? The Rocky movie came out, and then they put a real statue up in Philadelphia. Oh, all right. I could just talk about that song all day.
Well, as fantastic as California Girls is, and there's no debating that, the next song on the album is really my favorite track on this record, and it's one of my favorite Beach Boys songs ever. It's Let 'Em Run Wild, Brian singing lead. Funnily enough, Brian doesn't like his own performance on this song and has always dismissed it. I don't understand that at all, because to me, this is one of the most powerful and moving Beach Boy songs ever.
Yeah, a great song, and if you really listen to the horns...
Right.
Just the horns are pretty heavy. The lyrics came about from the standpoint of some girl just getting her head turned by some guy, and it's so obvious that she's getting a snow job from him.
Yeah. Yeah.
But... Peter Ream, I don't know how many people know that name, but they do well to know it. It's R-E-U-M. Peter is a great Beach Boys historian. And I'm going to read you what Peter wrote about this song, because if I had known it, I had forgotten it, and it's pretty interesting to me. Here's what Peter writes. Let 'Em Run Wild is a letter in sound from Brian to Audrey, his mother, upon learning that his father had an affair. The lyrics reflected Brian's feeling at the time, and his commitment to his mom as the oldest son was that he would look after her because his father wouldn't.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and when you have that information and you listen to the song,
a whole new light.
A whole new light, and you can almost, maybe that's when you listen to it, the way Brian does push the falsetto, it's emphatic.
That might explain a little bit why maybe Brian doesn't have great feelings about that song.
That could very well.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about the 93 box set. I think he vetoed that song being on there.
Yeah, maybe because in the back of his mind, that song may remind him of his dad.
Yeah.
And anybody who knows the history of the Beach Boys, or if they don't know, Brian was never, ever able to resolve his issues with his father.
Just an incredible piece of work right there. Next up on Summer Days and Summer Nights, side 2, is You're So Good to Me, a song that, kind of has a little bit of a Four Seasons vibe to it.
Yeah, I hear more of a Motown.
Yeah, I can hear that too.
But this is very R&B. The great thing to me is just the grit in the voice.
Yeah.
Al, this is great. I'll just show you a brief thing from Al. This is what's so funny about what these guys remember. You remember the Beach Boys would tour, they would come back, go into the studio, and Brian would put them to work. They were getting very little rest. Brian was getting more rest than they were, because Brian, by this time, was not touring. So Al, he says... See, Brian would have us in the studio as soon as we returned from the road because he was so impatient to get us back in the studio. We started laughing around the microphone so hard that I couldn't stop laughing. The actual muscular requirement to sing la 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 made my tongue start to freeze up, literally, from the exertion after being on the road for so many months. it was like doing 10 extra wind sprints after a football practice. It was one of the few times that I couldn't finish my part. It's so funny and such a good memory to have. I completely lost control of myself and fell on the floor laughing.
Well, luckily for Al, the next song on the album doesn't have any vocals at all. It's a beautiful instrumental called Summer Means New Love, pointing the way, I think, to Pet Sounds a little bit with Let's Go Away for a While and Pet Sounds, great instrumentals on that record. But I find it interesting that Brian would return to this song 50 years later and put lyrics to it on his No Peer Pressure album.
Yeah, Summer Means New Love is a really wistful, beautiful piece. I never really thought of it as something that was unfinished. It really seems like it ought to be the song that carries over into And Your Dreams Come True. Unfortunately, that's...
Yes, broken.
Fortunately or unfortunately, it's not the case, but it's really lovely. Both recordings are lovely.
We just heard a medley, I suppose you could call it, of Summer Means New Love into that instrumental classic, now with lyrics, titled Somewhere Quiet, from Brian Wilson's latest solo album, No Peer Pressure. David Beard of Endless Summer Quarterly joins us as we discuss the Summer Days and Summer Nights album. David, you mentioned that here we are with this beautiful, lush instrumental, and it would have segued so nicely into the last track on the album, which is an a cappella piece called And Your Dreams Come True. But no, we have to pause for a moment of levity. We had talked about Brian Wilson's complicated relationship with his father. Here, that tension is played for comedy on a song called I'm Bugged at My Old Man. Very strange
it's
cut.
Certainly farcical humor. And not dissimilar to Amusement Parks USA.
Yeah.
Brian had actually, by 1967, wanted to do a humor album. Who knows what that would have been.
Yeah. An album full of this, probably.
Oh, boy. This is Brian venting.
Yeah.
The lyrics could have been anything, but they weren't. And that was by choice. And I think, not to go too deep here, but Brian had had enough of his father. By this point, he had had enough of him. And he was just trying his own way to kind of just get it out of his system so he would kind of move on. That's what I hear in this.
We're back with Endless Summer Quarterly's David Beard as we wrap up our discussion about the Beach Boys' Summer Days and Summer Nights album released on this day back in 1965, 50 years ago. We're up to the last track. It's an a cappella number, and listening to this, And Your Dreams Come True is the name of the piece. It makes you wish that the Beach Boys had done an entire album of a cappella numbers, because here we get Brian Wilson's love for the Four Freshmen in full effect, and it's just fantastic.
Yeah, it kind of is based around the Baba Black Sheep melody.
Yes.
Yeah, very pretty. A really nice way to end the album, kind of get grounded again, remind all the listeners who the Beach Boys are. It's interesting to note that this song was actually recorded at Columbia Records, and Bruce was co-producer on it and did not sing on this song because he was producing, unofficially, of course, because he couldn't be associated with the Beach Boys yet.
Right. Which we'll discuss in a second when we get to the cover.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. So Bruce had never, you have to keep in mind, Bruce Johnston coming into the group is a pretty fascinating story in itself, because he was used to, regardless of the number of tracks, whether you're doing 8-track or 3-track recorder, when he did Hey Little Cobra with Terry Melcher, was just a 3-track recorder. Bruce's most dynamic style of recording was with 2 people.
Right, yeah.
Prior to the Beach Boys, because it was him and Terry doing all the ripcord stuff, or Bruce and Terry, or the Rogues, or whatever it was. But never was Bruce, prior to the Beach Boys, was he exposed to 4 guys singing around one microphone and blending. He had never experienced that. But to his credit, because of his background and his professional IQ, he was able to kind of hop right in there. And Brian was very unselfish. Like we were talking about earlier with Brian and the Wrecking Crew, the musicians,
right.
How he knew when to listen. Similarly, when it came to the vocal part of the album, Brian was very unselfish with Bruce and invited Bruce to sing on a lot of the recordings. And Bruce is pretty well all over this album.
You're so sleepy.
Just beautiful. No one like them. So let's turn our attention to the cover of the Summer Days and Summer Nights album. Now, we mentioned that Bruce Johnston was not officially a Beach Boys member at that time, so we wouldn't expect to see him on the cover. But I'm looking at it now, and there's Brian front and center. I see Mike, I see Carl, I see Dennis. Somehow they managed to have Dennis sit still for a few moments to take a picture. So I see 4 Beach Boys, but aren't there supposed to be 5 Beach Boys? Where's Al? This is very weird.
Well, okay, it is weird. Well, Al says on the back of the album, all of the guys are on the back of the album with a little note to the fans, and then they autograph the box. And he just says that he's sorry he missed the boat on the album cover. The very day the pictures were taken, I had to spend in bed with a flu bug instead of on a yacht with the photographer.
Now, so this was the only day that they could take this album cover photo.
That's my question, too.
Yeah.
It seems awfully, I don't know if suspicious is the right word, but it's a really cool cover.
Yeah, very cool. It's just missing a guy. That's
it's kind of the one time that we get to see it's the only time that we see the family. It's just the family on the cover.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I never thought of it that way. Yeah. Sorry, Al, you're not related. This is a family outing.
You're not related, so we're not including you.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it is a little weird that they couldn't have waited a day or something to do it.
Yeah, if you were a kid in '65 and the Beach Boys were your favorite group and, Al was your favorite member, you'd be pretty crestfallen, seeing that photo and going, oh, no, is he overboard? Where did he go? They tie him to the mast?
Yeah, but the great thing is all you had to do is pick up the record and flip it over if you were thinking, I'm not going to buy this if there's no Al Jardine. Oh, right. Here, he's explaining.
Right. They were like,
and I see that he sings 2 leads. Wonderful. I'll buy this.
They could be saying...
Help Me Rhonda is listed on the cover.
Yeah.
So actually, I take that back. No, it's not.
It's not. See? I could see
Then I Kissed Her is...
Right, but they wouldn't have known. Yeah. But I could see a fan saying, you guys already did this to me once with David Marks. Now Al Jardine's gone. But, it's an iconic photo. I mean, it really is. We should mention that this 50th anniversary of Summer Days and Summer Nights, we're talking about it. The latest issue of Endless Summer Quarterly is all about this. And, of course, the Beach Boys are celebrating this. Mike and Bruce are doing this on their tour this summer. They're focusing on this record.
Yep. And what is really unique, first time ever, I think, in the history of the group. Well, first I'll say that I had the privilege and honor to put together the Beach Boys' current tour program, which is the Summer Days and Summer Nights album. So it's an entire program, 12 by 12, the size of an album, dedicated to this album. And in it, part of what I wanted to do, very similar to the way I put together Endless Summer Quarterly, is I wanted to, if somebody's buying this, I wanted them to have the information if they were a casual fan, or if they were a hardcore fan, that they'd still be learning something and picking up something that they didn't know before. So they'd really a value to it, kind of a collector's value to it, but also an informative value to it. Mm-hmm. Bruce and I did an interview that part 1 of how he becomes, gets involved in the group is in the program, exclusively in the program. It's a 2-page spread in the program. It picks up in ESQ, part 2.
Ah, okay.
So if you want both parts of this interview, you have to have the program and ESQ. Go
to the show and then subscribe. There
right.
you
go. go to the show and then go to the merchandise table. Al Jardine won't be there, by the way. That was kind of... It just so happens. But it was really a neat thing to do because I don't know, anyone who might be listening might be a fan of Glen Campbell's, but for those who've been following Glen's career, you know that he's quite a gifted musician and artist in his own right.
Oh, sure.
And for those who may not know, Glen was a touring Beach Boy beginning December 26, 1964, and he replaced Brian on the road for the most part between December 26, 64 and late April going into, depending on who you talk to, possibly May 65. But he kind of filled in where he could, and Glen is an integral part of the Beach Boys, not so much in taking Brian's place on the road for the short time that he did, but also because Glen was often played on those sessions with the other Wrecking Crew members, and is a friend of the Beach Boys themselves. All the guys, I think, have always considered Glen a comrade, a friend. So we were able to do a page that I called On Tour with Glen Campbell that's in the program.
Oh, good.
Just a page of Glen and on stage. It's a montage, kind of. And in the middle, I put the single, Guess I'm Dumb.
Oh, okay, yeah, there you go.
Because that was released June 7th, 65. So talk about 50 years later, 50-year anniversary. And that was pretty much a Brian Wilson single. I mean, it features a beautiful falsetto from Campbell, and the song, which is very brooding and moody, is a peach etched from Brian Wilson's soul and definitely foreshadows Brian's work with the Beach Boys on the group's critically acclaimed 66 Pet Sounds album.
Yeah.
This is one of those songs that is kind of like the same type of stuff that we were hearing from the Second Side of Today, and it's kind of the link between the Second Side of Today and Pet Sounds.
That was the Brian Wilson written and produced Glen Campbell single, Guess I'm Dumb, and we're talking to David Beard of Endless Summer Quarterly magazine. David, where can people go to find out about the magazine?
Well, the easiest place, I think, because most people these days are on Facebook, is to go to just on your Facebook, just type in at the top, Endless Summer Quarterly. That'll take you right to our page. And through that page, you can kind of see the latest issues that are coming out or that will be coming out. The magazine actually breathes fresh air into, subject matter that's over 50 years old.
Yeah.
And that's always cool. The website is esquarterly.com.
David, it's always a joy to have these conversations. And I hope you'll come back in August when we have our Beach Boys Bash.
I will. You let me know, and I will. I'll be there.
Yeah, we'll have to think about something to talk about. I'm sure we won't. I'm sure we won't have a problem with that. And at some point, we really ought to do a Jan and Dean based discussion.
Oh, I'm ready already.
All right. Thank you, David.
Be well.
Yep, you too. I'll be in touch with you.